Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I'm Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Constellation Season 1, Episode 1. It's called The Wounded Angel. This is a new show from Apple TV Plus, a science fiction show starring Noomi Rapace. I think that's how you say her name. I could be wrong though. People could correct me in the comments. Jonathan Banks and James Darcy are also in here. So 3 episodes of this launch. This is something that Apple do, is they'll put 2 or 3 of the episodes out on day 1 and then weekly from then on. I did toy with the idea of just watching the first 3 episodes in one big clump, but I actually had technical issues today. My Wi-Fi was acting up for a while, so I'm a bit later in the day than I was hoping to be, but I did get the first episode watched, so it felt worth giving some impressions on that and seeing how I feel about it. I was very intrigued by the premise of this because it's kind of delving into broadly things I'm quite into in sci-fi, which is the idea of parallel worlds and alternate realities and that kind of thing. I won't say too much just in case people have went into this cold and don't want to know the premise of the show. I'll keep this mostly spoiler free. I'll maybe do a little bit of spoilers for this first episode towards the end, but it's a show that's set, or at least starts off set on the ISS, the International Space Station, and it's all about an accident that happens up there, a mysterious accident, and most of this first episode is about the main character, Joe, trying to survive and possibly get back down to Earth, and that's basically the episode. There's definitely some mysterious bookends that are set a little bit later in the timeline, which indicate that she does get back to Earth, that we know that's going to happen. But there's some little oddities about it. It definitely has a bit of a dreamlike quality in how it's presenting a couple of the transitions, especially towards the end of the episode. The way it goes from like the 5 weeks ago part that's on the space station to back to like present day, if you will, does have a couple of weird dreamlike moments and things like that, which I wasn't expecting that. I think I was expecting something that was a bit colder and harder sci-fi wise. This feels like it's dealing with a cold sci-fi kind of premise, but it's approaching it with a little bit of a mysticism and its kind of vibe and its tone. Or at the very least, it's presenting that way from the main character's perspective, which is that of some confusion, some like things mixing together, whatever, right? As for how did I feel about this, it's kind of a mixed bag of a first episode. Because I see potential, I really like some of the actors, and I think the performances are really solid. It feels quite high production value, like a lot of Apple TV shows do. Other than the bookended stuff that's present day, and a few scenes that are on Earth where they're sort of talking to the astronauts, for the most part, this is a lot of stuff on the space station, and a lot of effect shots of like spacewalks and things like that. It feels like there's a lot of money's went into it. But in a weird way, because this episode is basically a disaster happens and it's like we have to assess the damage and then make some choices and then sort of try and fix problems to get back to Earth, it feels like an okay version of something that we've seen done much better in a lot of other things, mostly movies, but I'm sure probably a TV show here or there. But you've seen like a Gravity, or you've seen an Apollo 13, or you've seen anything like this. This feels like it's doing a lot of those beats. Now, there are hints of like where we're going with the show overall, because it's not just that. It's not 8 episodes or 10 episodes of just trying to get off the space station. That's not what the premise of this show is. And I actually think that if I didn't know what the broad premise was watching this episode, I probably would have been even a little more siding to negative, because while there's a couple of hints that are intriguing, it's the promise of what it's going to be that was keeping me more interested in looking for the clues, as opposed to really grabbing my attention on its own. I think there's maybe just a few too many characters kind of bouncing off of each other a lot. There's a lot of cutting around. It's one of these very heavily edited pieces where we're going from astronauts in the station to not, and obviously I have no problem with cutting to like ground control talking to them, but then it cuts to like multiple people because it's the International Space Station, so there's representatives who have got opinions on what's going on around the planet down below, and we kind of cut around a few of those, and they're also very vague about a couple things, which I guess is for mystery elements, but I would have liked maybe something a bit more concrete about something that seems very heavily tied to the premise of the show and the accident that happens here. The American astronaut on the station is doing an experiment with something called Cal. And other than one little line and the fact that Jonathan Banks down in California really cares about this, they don't really go into like setting up really what this is for, what it's trying to do all that much. They kind of shrug it off. But the scene itself, and in the Joe, the main character, her daughter, who she's talking to over Skype or whatever on her tablet, says, "What's that for? What are they doing?" And she just kind of shrugs it off with one line because she doesn't really know what they're doing. Because it's an American experiment. She's not really involved in it. And I almost kind of felt like, okay, I get why she's saying that, but I feel like me as the audience, I want a bit more understanding for this, especially if it is kind of this, like, seemingly might be the culprit of what's happened. I don't know that for sure. That's just kind of some theorization on my part, but it seems like it's probably this thing turning on, this little mini, I don't know, particle accelerator, whatever the hell it is probably what's causing this accident and whatever else is going to happen. So it's a frustrating first episode because of that, because I feel like it's poorly constructed as an episode of TV. I didn't feel like it took me through a story so much as it felt like it was going through a lot of the usual beats of a disaster in space, with some hints here or there. I think the structure and the editing and the pacing of which it just dances around all these characters almost felt it harder to get like an anchor into like really getting into it. It is a shame because I do think some of the hints are quite intriguing. I am curious to at least check out another episode of this, just because I do want to see if it starts to kind of find its footing. I think this feels kind of like messy pilot syndrome to me. Even though it's like a streaming show and they don't typically have pilots in the same way, it kind of feels like a very haphazard start. So I never fell in love with it. I never was having a terrible time. Like it's perfectly watchable in most of the things that it's doing, but I never felt all that attached to what was going on the screen. So kind of a mixed bag for a first episode for me. And I realize now I want to talk about spoilery things, so I'm going to say spoilers for the first episode, and only the first episode. 2 and 3 are already out. I've not seen those. We're just talking about episode 1 here. So the main premise of the show is that this astronaut, Joe, comes back to Earth, but things are different. Like, she's come back to a slightly alternate Earth, right? That's the main thing I knew about this show going in. And there are some interesting little tidbits in here that kind of tease towards that. The main one being in the present day stuff at the start, she's listening to an audio cassette of someone speaking in a different language, probably Swedish because that's her language, but I mean, I don't have the ears for it. But the daughter asks what's being said, and Joe translates for her. Seems like a nothing moment. However, when we go back 5 weeks earlier, and we're on the space station, and Joe's talking to her daughter there, they start speaking in presumably this same language. The daughter here clearly knows how to speak this. And it's the first, to me, big sign that the daughter in that opening chunk of the episode is not the same daughter that this woman actually knew before she went up to space. And she even looks quite upset in that opening chunk as well, because the daughter wants a story, and when she offers to read her something, she says, "No, I want the one you said when you were up in the station," and she pulls out a tablet and plays a recording of a message of a bedtime story she got from her mother when she was on the space station. And the implication of this scene to me, and I thought this was good, the way this was sort of implied, was that this was her real mother, right? Like, the idea that if Joe, that we're following on the space station, who comes back down to Earth and now is meeting this version of her daughter who can't speak her like native language, the same is true for this girl who kind of feels like detached from this new version of her mom. She can kind of tell maybe deep down, or something feels off, that it's not really her mother. So she's watching this recording of the one that she actually knew. This was the other Joe that was on a space station before some switch happened, or before, I mean, assuming they just switched places. If not, the other one might even be dead. Who knows? I don't know yet. I'm just, we're just going on what's in this episode. So I thought that was good hints. I thought those were good little teases of what was to come. As far as anything else goes, like throughout the episode, obviously when the experiments turned on, something hits the station, and when Joe goes out to go looking for it, she finds various bits of damage, of course, but ultimately whatever it was landed in a part of the exterior of the ship. And surprisingly, it turns out to be an astronaut, or more specifically, a cosmonaut. It's an orange cosmonaut uniform, and it appears to be a dead woman in the suit. And, she, like, obviously, we don't know the extent of the changes on Earth when she comes back down. Could we assume that this is a cosmonaut from an alternate Earth where maybe Russia's in more power and that's why everyone's a cosmonaut? That seems like a really, really big change, and I don't know if the change is going to be that dramatic, but it certainly feels tied to the fact that whatever this machine did when it turned on, it's maybe, caused a ripple or a rip or a tear through space-time or something. So that was interesting. It was kind of creepy. It was a little eye-rolly that another astronaut comes out to help her, and her video feeds down. So she's saying that she sees a body, but no one in ground control can see it. And when the other astronaut comes out to get her, when he turns to see if to get a visual on whatever she saw, it's already gone. And there's a moment where he's coming out, and you can literally see it going past like the edge of the station where it's now obscured from view, so that we know he never sees it. As far as anyone's concerned, the only person who ever witnessed the fact that there was a random body in space, unlikely as that is, was Joe. So that was a little bit like, okay, like you could have, it almost just felt a little bit too orchestrated, I guess, in a weird way. But yeah, I mean, I think the other things that I want to mention, other than the fact that Jonathan Banks is really desperate to get this experiment back down, because for the few seconds that it was on, it exposed a new version of matter, a new state of matter, and it did look like two things separating, almost as if it represented the world splitting into two or something like that. Like, I can't ignore that visual. Again, a moment a detail that I quite like. There's a lot of details in this that I quite like. I just thought overall as a package it felt a little bit stilted in terms of pacing and that kind of thing. Yeah, the other main thing though was probably towards the ending. Ultimately Joe, one out of the 4 remaining astronauts, after one dies, and we get a whole big dramatic CPR scene, as you do. I did like that the astronaut performing CPR, the French astronaut, she puts her feet up on the other side of the wall so she gets pressure to push herself into the chest, because obviously there's no gravity. So I like that little detail. But Joe stays behind because 3 of them get to go down in one of the modules. The other one has to stay behind and hopefully fix the second module to go down back to Earth. And the reason why only one has to stay behind rather than someone else getting a chance to help them is because there's only enough life support left for one person for about 19 hours. So that actually gives them more of a chance. But it does, it puts whoever's staying behind in this kind of, oh, you're in more danger, you might not make it back, and the other 3 might. It raises that kind of stakes, and that that raises drama on the ground, because the husband and the daughter obviously find out about this, and there's a whole race to get them to ground control. But when she's on her own and she's working on stuff, she, towards the end of the episode, hears some noises and goes looking, and it ends up turning into a hallway, and she's walking towards this closet that's got a necklace that we've seen at least a version of this necklace which her daughter gave her, and she's going towards this closet, but before she opens it, she's back on the station, and she looks around, and then she hears the daughter scream "Mum," and then it snapbacks to "In the Snow" from the start of the episode. And that's interesting because it almost implies there's some kind of timey-wimey aspect to this as well, with where her consciousness is at and how she's experiencing things. But at the very least, this idea that it's almost like for her, the two realities might be actually bleeding together in a weird way, or mixing apart. Because at the end, it seems like she's walked across the snow and found maybe an identical cabin to the one that she was in the other daughter with, and comes in and finds another. I'm not sure if it's the same version of her daughter as the one from the start. If I don't think it is, because she speaks the language. Yeah, that's the other big point at the end, is that she opens the closet, the daughter's there freezing her ass off, And she's like, Mum, where are you? And then she says something in presumably Swedish. Again, I'm guessing the language. I'm not actually sure, but I think Swedish. So, you know, that's almost like she's literally walked over a threshold into a mirror image of where she was to go back to her real daughter, like her actual daughter. So I don't really know, like, is she going to be like going backwards and forwards throughout the entire show? I wasn't expecting that when I heard the premise. I thought she was going to be trapped in this new version that she didn't know, and the whole show was going to be about her wanting to get back home or trying to figure it out or fix it or something like that. So definitely a few interesting wrinkles that are thrown in here from the premise that are keeping me on my toes. And that's a good thing, probably, because, you know, there's almost like an expectation, if you've seen enough sci-fi, of like, oh, this is how this type of story is going to go. So the fact that they're playing with it in slightly different ways is perhaps interesting. You know, I did think that, you know, when the space station turned into a hallway and it was like there was gravity again and it's like she's in the hallucination kind of thing, I was sort of feeling a little bit like, oh, we're doing this kind of thing. It's not just going to be like hard proof that something's changed. There's going to be more kind of mind-bendy stuff where she's not aware of her reality or whatever. There's going to be like unreliable elements to things that she's seeing, which maybe calls into question things like the cosmonaut from earlier in the episode. That's interesting. I don't necessarily know if I prefer it yet. Like that part of it, I'm kind of like, it's up in the air for me. I have to see more before I have a solid opinion on that. I think where I'd come back to critiquing the episode a little bit is that I think a really good version of this pilot would have made me really care about her attachment to her daughter, so that I felt something beyond just, oh, she said something in the language at the end, right? That was the excitement for me. But had this been like a great version of this pilot in terms of its script and the way it was structured, I think I would have also felt like a good sense of relief and happiness that she'd found her real daughter again. I think that would have, you know, really put this over the top as a good start to the story if it actually made me care about those connections. And I think as of right now, probably that is like one of the bigger complaints of it, is that her connection to her daughter, and there is an implication from the daughter that the husband and Joe weren't on the best of terms maybe before she went up to space. I feel like those connections are all feeling just kind of typical, just kind of there because we're supposed to have them in a TV show, and not that the show didn't actually go out of its way to make me care about the fact that she loves her daughter, or that she, you know, really cares about, I don't know, like, obviously she cares about her daughter. I'm not saying that, I'm not convinced of that, but it didn't make me connect to that connection in this episode. And part of that, I don't know why that is, honestly, beyond just different scenes being written. Maybe actually having the scene where she gets to talk to her daughter 5 weeks ago before everything like happens on the space station, maybe that was almost a mistake. You know, like, I know obviously I had the revelation there, hey, she's speaking the foreign language, but you could have still just had that at the end, maybe, and just had the sense of relief. I was actually very surprised that we didn't go back to the present day throughout the episode. I was kind of expecting it after the opening to sort of jump backwards and forwards. And I'm not sure what the structure is going to be going forward, actually. Like, is it just going to be these bookends at the start and end of episodes? Or is it going to, maybe some episodes will be more in the present day? Is it just going to go linear now, for the most part, with the odd little flash to the future? I don't know. Like, I'm actually genuinely curious about that kind of thing. So, yeah, mixed bag. I just wish that I just cared more about her connections to her daughter and her husband, and her you know, desire to go home. I think ultimately this felt a little bit hollow from a character perspective so far, but interesting from a premise perspective. And it's entirely possible that they'll remedy that over episodes because you've got time to flesh things out. But I do think that a great version of this pilot, of this first episode, would have given me some of that already. And I think that's maybe the biggest sin. And it just felt a little bit cold, as, like I say, as we're cutting around so many characters and just doing the beats. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying they don't do anything to try and make you care. They do the typical things of like when she's saying bye to the other astronauts and she's like, "Hey, if I don't make it back, look out for my husband and my daughter." And the other astronauts like nodding, like yeah, like like they do the basics, but I never really felt all that moved by any of that as of yet. It felt like it was maybe rushing through certain parts of it, I guess. Maybe, I don't know. But I'm curious. I do want to at least check out another episode and see how I feel once it's maybe started to settle a little bit. But yeah, interesting little detail I liked that I appreciated that they didn't over-explain is that when the 3 astronauts land on Earth, they like carry them out of the pod like they're corpses almost, and just put them on some chairs and put some sunglasses on them. And I really appreciated it because it occurred to me that, yeah, because they've been in 0G for however long, their bodies aren't accustomed to walking, on Earth, or, with gravity. Like, like their bodies need some time to maybe build back up to that. So I feel like most space stuff doesn't deal with that. I don't know how true it is. Maybe it depends how long you've been up there. If you physically do have some problem, because I assume if you just pop up for a quick orbit and come back down, you probably don't really notice anything. But yeah, I don't know. It was interesting. I liked it, and I liked that they didn't over explain it. I just kind of got it from context, and I appreciate that. So yeah. Also, the Cal experiment thing was lighting up again towards the end of the episode, probably right before all the hallucination style stuff was happening. Well, whether or not that's actually an hallucination, I'm just calling it that because it kind of feels like it's in our head, but obviously, given the type of plot we're dealing with and premise we're dealing with, there's room for whatever there. All right, there you go. That's my thoughts on the first episode of Constellation. Oh, actually, a visual note is right before the end when she finds the other cabin, the one that she ultimately finds her daughter who speaks the language in. There's like a slow motion moment before she goes in where all the snowdrops kind of like almost freeze still for a moment. And it almost looked like she was walking through space. Like all the snowdrops almost looked like stars, like in the night sky. And it was like she was literally walking through a star field for a brief moment. Again, interesting choices from a technical point of view. I can't really fault that necessarily. So, yeah. But yeah, let me know what you thought of the first episode in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Helps out a bunch if you do. And of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Help keep the lights on. And if you want me to keep reviewing Constellation, please do let me know. The more support I see for a particular show, the more likely I am to stick with it. So thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?